Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on education. In this video we're going to look at Diane Reay's report, Measuring and Understanding Contemporary English Educational Inequalities. Diane Reay's report, Measuring and Understanding Contemporary English Educational Inequalities, looks at why some children do much better in school than others, and how the English education system often makes those differences worse instead of helping to close the gap. She argues that while politicians talk about giving every child a fair chance, the way schools are organised and funded tends to reproduce the same advantages for middle and upper class children, while leaving working class children at a disadvantage. One of the first issues Reay points out is that the government's main measures of disadvantage are flawed. For example, eligibility for free school meals is often used to show which children are poor. But the income threshold is set so low that many families who struggle financially do not qualify. In fact, around 40% of children living below the poverty line are not counted in free school meal statistics. This means the extent of inequality is underestimated. Another measure, called Polar 4, looks at whether young people in an area go on to higher education. But this is crude and misleading, because within the same area there may be huge differences between families. For example, wealthy families live close to those in poverty. Official statistics also tend to ignore private school pupils, even though they make up around 7% of all children, but in a higher share of those in elite universities and top jobs. When more detailed categories are used, the data shows persistent gaps in attainment. Children from professional families, such as doctors or lawyers, consistently achieve higher GCSE grades than children from routine or manual backgrounds, such as cleaners or labourers, and these differences have remained across decades. Reay stresses that we cannot just look at the schools themselves. Wider social and economic conditions play a massive role. Since 2010, child poverty has increased in the UK, with incomes falling for the poorest families and rising slightly for the richest. Between 2015 and 2018, Britain had the highest rise in child poverty of all OECD countries. Research shows that children who grow up in poverty are more likely to have lower well-being, less confidence and worse results in school. So inequality in education reflects inequality in society more broadly. Within schools, Reay argues that certain practices make inequalities worse. One example is the heavy use of testing, setting and streaming. Children are tested from a young age, and once they are placed in lower sets, it's very difficult to move up. Many working class children in bottom sets describe feeling hopeless, ignored by teachers and unmotivated. Some even say there is no hope for them to do well, and these feelings damage confidence and create anxiety about failure. Teachers and schools are also under pressure from Ofsted inspections and league tables, and this leads to a culture of performativity, where the focus is on exam results above all else. Schools may teach to the test, or put resources into borderline students who are close to passing, rather than supporting those at the bottom or stretching the most able. While this may improve statistics, it narrows the curriculum and often harms disadvantaged students the most. Another problem is the focus on a knowledge-rich curriculum, which emphasises memorising facts and repeating information. Reay argues that while knowledge is important, this approach often sidelines creativity, critical thinking and problem-solving. International comparisons show that English schools score very highly for rote learning, but poorly for deeper thinking and motivation. This type of curriculum also tends to exclude the cultures and histories of working class and ethnic minority groups. Students often do not see their lives or communities reflected in what they study, and this can make school feel alienating and reinforce feelings of being less than compared to middle class peers. In many working class schools, teaching is shaped by what some researchers have called a pedagogy of poverty. This means lessons are focused on discipline, basic skills and raising test scores, rather than on creativity or participatory learning. In contrast, middle-class schools are much more likely to offer a richer educational experience that encourages independence and critical thinking. Reay highlights that social class and ethnicity interact in many complicated ways. Some ethnic minority families, such as Bangladeshi, Pakistani and African families, often place a very high value on education, even when they are poor. This is sometimes linked to experiences of downward mobility when moving to the UK, where parents may have been highly educated in their home country but end up in low-paid jobs. For these families, education is a way to restore lost status or repay sacrifices. White working class families, by contrast, often have a long history of educational disadvantage. Many parents feel they failed at school and therefore struggle to help their own children with confidence. This sense of educational exclusion has been passed down through generations. In addition, Reay argues that racism plays a role in shaping outcomes for some black students, particularly black Caribbean boys, who are more likely to face negative stereotypes and harsh discipline from teachers. Geography also matters. London, for example, has much higher rates of disadvantaged students going to university compared to other parts of England. This is partly because London has more economic opportunities and more outreach programs with universities. In contrast, areas like the North East have fewer opportunities, which reinforces regional inequalities. Private schools are a major factor in maintaining inequality. They have smaller class sizes, more resources and strong links to top universities and elite jobs. Although only 7% of children attend them, they dominate in professions such as law, politics and journalism. Reay calls them schools of power. Even within the state sector, segregation is increasing. Wealthier families cluster in high-performing schools, while working class and ethnically diverse children are concentrated in schools with fewer resources. These schools are often stigmatized as sink schools or rubbish schools, which affect how people see themselves. The COVID-19 pandemic has made all of these inequalities worse. Poorer children were much less likely to have laptops, good internet or quiet spaces to study, and many disadvantaged schools had to focus on welfare and food provision as well as teaching. In contrast, wealthier families could often pay for private tutors or had better resources at home. Research shows that the pandemic widened the attainment gap between rich and poor pupils. Reay concludes that the English education system is not a ladder of opportunity, but more of a system that protects privilege for some while making it very hard for others to succeed. Inequalities are built into the ways that schools are funded, how pupils are measured, and how knowledge is taught. If we want to reduce inequality, she argues, we need better early years education, fairer school funding, and a more inclusive curriculum that reflects the lives and cultures of all young people. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on education. Looking at Diane Reay's publication, Educational Equalities in England. Thanks for watching.